Hello, and welcome to Health and Fitness Redefined. I'm your host, Anthony Amen. Join me today as we take a dive into the world of health and fitness, where we learn to overcome adversity, to pick facts versus fiction, and see health and fitness in a whole new light. I am all about debunking myths, if all of you know. So, what we're going to do in this episode is we're going to cram as much as we can. And instead of really diving into a topic and kind of breaking it apart, we're just going to rapid fire. We did this once before, about a year ago, all about fitness myths. I'm going to bring it full circle. I have an awesome guest about to come on. He wrote this book right here, coming out in a week. So you can't really beat that. So without further ado, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the show, Dr. Robert Davis. Welcome to the show.
Hey, Anthony, it's great to be with you. Thanks for having me.
I'm super excited. I was telling you a little bit pre-show, went through your book, and there's a lot of stuff in there. I love how you took everything and just said, this is why this is not true. This is why this is not true. And just quickly rapid fire through everything. So it wasn't so drawn out. So thank you so much for doing that.
Well, thank you. I've enjoyed writing it. And, I've spent a lot of my career, I'm a health journalist, and that's what I do to try to help people figure out, because, there's so much confusing information about health and fitness. And so what I've tried to do in all my work and in this book is to sort through the research and help people figure out what's believable and what's not.
Yeah, it's definitely tough. So before we jump into the book, I just want to hear all about you. So you're a doctor. Why don't you explain to us a little bit about why you decided to go that career path, and then how you got from becoming a doctor to now journaling about health and writing a couple of awesome books?
Yeah, well, it starts with starting in college, I developed a very, very passionate interest in health and fitness and nutrition. So that's something that's been a big part of my life personally. And I became a health journalist working at CNN and in print as well for a number of years, and have done that. That's my career as a health journalist. I also have an academic background in public health and health policy. And so I've tried to draw on that academic training and go through the research. And in writing this book, I've gone through literally thousands of studies, and in the work that I do, I try to go through the research to sort of dissect the science to help people figure out what's believable and what's not. And so it's something that's important to me personally, because, I'm trying to figure out what's best for me. And so I try to do that for other people too. I'm not here to tell people what to do. So what I'm trying to do, though, is to lay out the information as honestly and objectively as I can, using the background that I have, and to help them make better decisions for themselves. So that's what I've done with my work, and that's what I've tried to do in this book, focus specifically on weight control.
I love it. It's more about, here's the information, take what you want from it, and have a nice day kind of approach. And hopefully you learn something. It's kind of how we take it, where it's this, we're going to give you all the information you need. We're going to set you up for success. But like, as a trainer, and I'm sure you can relate, we see somebody like an hour and a half to 2 hours a week. I'm not with them the rest of the time. So they could be just stuffing donuts down their face. I tried helping you, but I can't control the fact you're not losing weight or if you're getting better if you're at home just like munching away.
Right. And I think the other thing is that everybody, and the way that I look at it is everybody's different. So that, different things are going to work for different people, but there's still, fact and fiction. So what I try to do is lay out all the things that are factual. And so within that array of options, people can figure out what's going to work best for them. And what's right for one person may not be right for somebody else, but nevertheless, they at least know the things that science has shown are most likely to work.
Yeah, and I kind of this is a great segue to hop right into it. I've talked a lot about keto diet. I've talked a lot about that. So I'm going to steer away from that one. But if you want to throw in a quick 10-second blurb about it, I'll let you do that now. But I've talked about it so much. So I just want to hear your opinion. Quick 10 seconds.
All right. I'll try to do it in 10 seconds. So it's on fast. Keto diet can be fine as a Kickstarter diet. It works for a lot of people short term, but long term, the problem is it's not sustainable. And there are very few studies that show that it works and it's any better. There are no studies that show that it's any better than other diets long term. Long term dieting is not the answer. You need to have an eating pattern, eating habits that you can sustain for life. Keto doesn't work on that level for the vast majority of people.
Nailed it.
I don't.
Nailed the time. Awesome. All right, now we can get a little more extensive into topics. I'm going to start with calorie deficit. I think that's probably the one most people will go off of. Well, how many calories a day am I eating? What's the deficit off of that? If it's 3,500 calories per pound of fat, if I just do minus that a week, I'll end up losing a pound a week. So talk us through this one a little bit more.
Yeah, the calorie one is a big one. It's a complicated issue. And so we hear all the time, weight loss is just a matter of energy deficit. So if you take in fewer calories than you burn, then you'll lose weight. And it's a sort of simple math equation. But the truth is it's far more complicated than that because there's several things that happen. When we eat less, when we reduce our calories, our bodies compensate. They respond in a way that makes it more difficult to keep losing weight. I mean, we're set up by evolution. It's a gift to us so that we don't waste away, or we're less likely to waste away and die in case of a famine or in case of scarcity. Fortunately, we don't live in a society where that's the reality, but our bodies still are designed that way. So that when we're losing weight, when we're cutting calories, one thing that happens is that our metabolism slow down so that we essentially become more fuel efficient. And so what happens is this rule of thumb we often hear about, that 3,500 calories you mentioned, it assumes that our metabolisms just remain constant, but that's not true. We lose weight, our metabolism slow down, so we actually require fewer and fewer calories, and we have to reduce our calorie intake in order to maintain that weight or keep losing weight. So that's something that is lost in this simplistic calories in, calories out model.
I love something. I kind of talk about that a little bit. You were talking about how somebody loses weight, their metabolic rate starts slowing down, or they become more efficient in breaking down calories. Is there an end point? Because just in general, I've heard from other doctors that 1,200 calorie a day is the bare minimum you can have, because below that, you just don't get enough micro and macronutrients. It's just impossible. So is there a downside to that? Or do you think there should be a flip side where maybe instead of having our metabolism slow down by eating less, maybe we should just eat the same or maybe eat more?
Well, yeah, and I think that it's something that if we're gonna talk about long-term weight control, which is what matters here. Now, obviously, again, you can cut calories on any kind of diet short-term and lose weight. There's no question about that. The question is going to be what's going to happen over 6 months, a year, or longer. And so, yes, I think it's important to think about how do you because the solution to losing weight and keeping it off long-term is not starving yourself. And you're doing that. If you're down to 1,200 or 500 or 800 calories, you're starving your body. And so your body's going to respond. And so the idea here is to feed your body, to feed the nutrients you need. And there are ways to do that. And we can talk about that, but there are ways to eat more food, get the nutrients you need, and to feel full so that your body is not starving and you're not starving your body of the nutrients it needs.
I didn't plan for this, but today I was actually having this conversation with two of my clients. So it's just really funny how I was talking about it. And the examples I used was when you look at professional athletes, people that we are think of the epitome of health per se. Look at their calorie intake. Have you heard Michael Phelps talk? He's eating 10,000 calories a day, to the point the poor guy has to stuff down McDonald's just to get enough calories into his diet so he can maintain his muscle mass, because swimming is probably the hardest sport to do. It just requires so much energy. So is there justification for eating more and really doing that? I eat 3,500 a day, or I try to eat somewhere, and then people think I'm crazy. Can you just talk a little bit more in detail about that?
Well, obviously, that's going to be a function of how much. Obviously, most of us are not working at the way Michael Phelps does and not expending that kind of energy. So our bodies are not going to work the way his does. And so we can't necessarily look to him or other elite athletes, or even someone like you, Anthony, who I assume you work out a ton and more than the average person. And so that's going to affect the number of calories that your body needs and the number that you take in. But that said, there are ways to think about calories, or at least to think about food, as I see it, separate from calories, and think about the quality of your diet, and think about how those foods fill you up, and think about the so-called energy density, meaning that foods that have lower energy density, meaning that you, in a way, some people put it, they're more watery foods, things like salads, fruits, vegetables that are going to have more bulk, more fiber, fill you up, that may have fewer calories, but that are also going to leave you satisfied. And in my view, that's the most important thing, to find foods that are going to fill you up so you're not hungry all the time. Because if you're hungry all the time, obviously no diet, no matter what it is going to be successful for you.
I couldn't agree more. And something I usually talk about or do myself is when I have clients track, I actually tell them that they can, I want them to track everything, but not fruits and veggies. I said, I don't want those counting towards your caloric needs at all, because if you feel hungry, this diet isn't going to work. Like it's not going to happen. So we kind of made that very clear. So if you fill up on like very nutrition dense foods, your fruits and veggies, I just don't see a downside to it. I know some people think that's a little contradictory. What's your opinion on that?
I completely agree. And, you have diets that say don't eat certain fruits, or don't eat starchy vegetables, or don't eat bananas. And there are all these diets that, restrict fruits and vegetables. And that's, in my view, that's the downsides of some of these restrictive diets, that they deny people the ability to get the nutrients they need and foods that are actually going to be weight friendly by focusing on some aspect of the food. For example, bananas or apples that are high in sugar. But what they're forgetting is that the sugar that's in these foods is also accompanied by fiber and bulk, and so this sugar is not absorbed quickly the way it would if you were, say, eating a candy bar, and so that's going to make a big difference in how it affects your insulin level and your blood sugar level. And so this simplistic idea that fruit X is high in sugar, don't eat it, I think is not consistent with the science and in terms of how our bodies process these foods.
Yeah, I mean, you have to go listen to my episode I did of my own about fiber. I am a fiber maniac, some would say, trying to explain that to people. Where if you take sugar cane, where our sugar source comes from, if you ever seen sugar cane, it's a freaking bark. So if you ate that, there's so few sugar molecules on it. It's so high in fiber. I feel like that's just nature kind of balancing itself out with the fruits that have higher sugar contents. They also have a lot of bulk and fiber to them, so you don't get that blood sugar response that you would get from sweets and cakes and all that fun stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. And so that's why I completely agree that this demonization of fruits and certain vegetables is in a number of diets is misguided. Definitely.
Yeah, I think that pretty much sums up every single diet if you want to go through the list about how they don't work, because they really, if they're not sustainable, it's not something you're going to do for the rest of your life, don't do it. End of story. You got to enjoy life. You got to learn how to proportion and eat nutrition dense food. So with that being said, I want to jump into something completely different. Gluten, my favorite thing to talk about. And I read this part in your book. So talk to us about eating gluten-free compared to not eating gluten-free. Should those that don't have celiac disease do it? Pros and cons. Just walk us through the science on that a little bit more.
Well, what the science has consistently shown is that obviously people have celiac disease, no question, they need to avoid gluten. Some people have gluten sensitivity. The problem here is there are not a lot of really definitive tests, no definitive tests to tell. So people have to kind of go on their own experience, and that is not always totally reliable. But if people think that their bodies don't react well to gluten, then they can cut down on it. But I should say, as we know, it's very hard to do that because gluten is in so many foods where we don't even suspect it is. But nevertheless, if people find that it's helpful, but what the science overall shows is that unless you have gluten sensitivity or celiac disease, there's no health benefit to cutting back on gluten. And we see all the time all these foods that have a health halo, that are labeled as good for you because they're gluten-free. And it's a marketing gimmick. It's a way to get you to buy that food to make you think that it's better for you, when in fact there's not good scientific evidence that for most people, for cutting back or stopping gluten is going to make a difference. And in fact, a lot of the gluten-free foods are less healthful than their gluten-containing counterparts. So you get breads and other foods that don't contain gluten. They, in many cases, have more fat, fewer B vitamins, less fiber. And so you're better off from a health standpoint with the foods, the counterparts that actually contain gluten. So I know it's a very controversial subject. There are a lot of people that swear that gluten is a demon and that they have cut it out and they feel better. And that's fine. If that works for them, that's fine. But I'm saying basically strictly on the evidence, what we have, the science that we have, that there's not evidence that that for most people, cutting out gluten is going to make you healthier or make you lose weight, certainly.
Yeah, I love that answer. And I want to jump into another one, give some backstory to it first, which you've really nailed right on the head in your book. Like, I'm just going to tell you, you nailed it perfectly with how studies are done. And I want to explain something to people. If you look back, I think it was in the 70s. I might be wrong on the exact time frame and decade, but the United States did this landmark study to show that sugar is not the culprit, and it's actually fats. Fats are causing America to get fat. So what happened is all foods became low fat, and then we started having a plethora of other issues. I mean, when you look at to who sponsored the study, it was Coca-Cola. So clearly, if I owned Coca-Cola, I don't want a study showing that sugar is the downside. And it's just something that really goes home. People just see these studies, but they're not looking at who's sponsoring them. Was it a single blind? Was it a double blind? How were the trials done? What was the end value, meaning how many people were in the trial? If you're taking a study of 5 people, it's probably not accurate. But if you have 5 million people and there's a trend, then it's something we can kind of look at. But work us through how the United States has changed with the beef fat, then sugar is the culprit, but yet our waistlines are still higher than they ever been. And unfortunately, the pandemic, the biggest downside with this is that we saw an increase in the obesity population more than we've seen ever, which is blowing my mind. The more numbers that come out, the more that show how when people stayed home, they didn't exercise, they didn't move, they didn't eat right. And this obesity problem is just blown up out of proportion. So just walk us through that. I know there's a lot to take in.
Yeah, well, you're right. I mean, this history there, we've the last decades, we've had this history of sort of chasing these different demons and fingering a single culprit that's responsible. So you're right. It started off that fat is bad. Fat makes you fat, right? So these studies showed back at starting the 70s that fat was a contributor to heart disease, and it turned in fat is what makes you fat. So what do we get? The food industry floods the market with all these fat-free foods, and people told us, oh, eat SnackWells, eat all these fat-free foods, and people did. They cut back on their fat, and they bought all these fat-free convenience foods. And what happened? As you say, people got fatter, and they also got diabetes. So we ended up with having this epidemic of diabetes. And then after that, Robert Atkins comes along with the Atkins era in the 90s. He'd actually been around for a long time, but he realized an opportunity, and he reissued his book and said, okay, the problem is not fat, it's carbs. Cut out the carbs. And so we went through this era where carbs were the enemy, and we're still in that to a certain extent with the keto diet and so forth, where if you just cut back on carbs, that's the solution. Carbs are the enemy. And then since then, we've had people that we just talked about gluten, soda, the list goes on of, paleo, all these different theories as to what the reason is that people are gaining weight. And obviously, despite all this, we keep gaining weight. So nobody has the answer. And if you look at the studies, where studies do head-to-head comparisons of restricting, say, fat versus carbohydrates, what they find in study after study after study that over the long term, which is a year or longer, there's no difference in weight loss. That these diets have the exact same effect. And it stands to reason that they're all restrictive diets, that people are unable to sustain them. And that the bottom line is that weight control is far more complicated than involving one villain, that if you cut out food X or category X, then you're going to lose weight and be healthy. It's far more complicated than that. It involves your overall eating pattern, the composition of foods in your diet overall, not whether you're cutting out one thing or another. But yet this idea persists, this myth continues to persist in the people, maybe because it's easy to believe, maybe because people make money off of it. That's certainly a reason. The food companies love this because they can crank out more fat-free foods, more carb-free foods, more sugar-free foods, and we gobble them up thinking they're going to help our waistline and our health. But there are all kinds of forces that perpetuate this idea. But obviously, it's not working because despite all this effort, despite our focusing on all these demons, the problem is getting worse. And you're right. During the pandemic, it's been exacerbated further because people are not moving their bodies, and they're not focusing on necessarily on their health. They're at home doing other things, and so it's an enormous challenge that we're far from figuring out.
Yeah, and I believe the substitute, which is something you mentioned as well, people are now hearing sugar, 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 sugar. So what are they doing now? They're having sugar alcohols, they're having diet drinks, which may be 0 calories. But I mean, I think in both our opinions, it's safe to say that I personally believe they're way worse. You don't know the real big issues that are going to come from having these chemicals. Personally, I probably shouldn't disclose this, but I think it's important. I get really bad GI distress from sugar alcohols. And I think a lot of people can relate to that. And I know that when I have something that's really high in fake sugar, that actually I end up craving sweets way more because in our minds, this is 10 times sweeter than regular sugar. So now I just want more sweets. And when I just cut it all out and I go, it takes about 3 days, because I think it's the same with smoking, where all of a sudden it's just like, wow, I really don't want any of it. And then all of a sudden I have a life where it's like, all right, I don't need sugar. And the sugar I'm getting from my natural sources aren't giving me those intense cravings as if I had a piece of cake or if I had a diet drink. What do you think of this?
No, I agree completely. You know, there's studies, they're not definitive, but they're suggestive that exactly what you're saying is true with regard to how our brains respond to artificial sweeteners, to sugar substitutes. So that some theories are that our bodies think our brains say, okay, we're getting this substance, this soda or whatever it is, and the calories are coming, and the calories don't come because they're calorie free. And then our brains cause us to crave even more calories that we're not getting. And so we end up craving more food and we eat more. Now, that's just one theory, but perhaps it helps explain why in a number of studies, if not most studies, that sugar substitutes, foods that have artificial sweeteners do not result in weight loss, people who eat these foods. And that's contrary to what you might think. They have 0 calories, so of course they should result in weight loss. But study after study after study, that is those done by independent entities as opposed to the food industry supporting, artificial sweeteners, but those studies that are done independently fail to show that artificial sweeteners and diet soda and so forth result in weight loss. And so that's certainly one reason. Another reason that sometimes people offer explanation for this is that it's what I call, I'll have a large fry, Big Mac, and a Diet Coke. Sometimes having artificial or diet drinks make people feel virtuous, and they feel, okay, well, I'm doing something for my weight so that I feel entitled to therefore splurge in another way. And sometimes it's subconscious. Maybe they don't realize they're doing that, but that it gives people, perhaps some people, a license to overeat in other ways because they feel that somehow they're doing good by drinking diet soda. So that may be an explanation to some extent as well. But the bottom line, as you say, is that not only do they not help necessarily, they can make matters worse. And as you point out, there are links between artificial sweeteners and adverse outcomes. There's not proof of cause and effect, but there are a number of studies that show associations. People that use artificial sweeteners, diet drinks, and so forth are more likely to have strokes, dementia, a number of things, adverse health outcomes. So there's that concern, certainly.
Yeah, definitely. I just, that's why I was just talking personal, like how I feel personally with them. But it is food for thought. Like we don't know the long-term effects of them, and we just kind of putting cause and effect together based upon, well, this person had a stroke at the age of 65. Well, what were they eating? And that's kind of what we're looking at with studies. It makes it really difficult, but I love your points on that. You really helped summarize a lot. Something you also mentioned in your book, which I think is on a lot of people's minds, is I'm going to just do what you said, the skinny gene, where you were talking about how we all have that friend that has a horrible diet and is thin as a rail, but then there's somebody else who's eating super healthy and might have like 10, 15 pounds of extra weight on them. So what's the reasoning behind something like this? And for those that, let's say, either like myself, like I can eat pretty much whatever I want, but I choose not to, where I won't gain weight, is there a downside to me eating bad foods? Or B, if there's somebody that is overweight, how can we help them lose that weight if they really have to be restrictive on what they eat? And that's a lot,
Yeah.
but
Yeah, well, it's a complicated matter, and yeah, you're right. We know those people that we hate who can eat whatever they want. At least we don't hate you, Anthony, but most of us always look at the people and say, "Wow, those jerks! They can eat whatever they want. And they never gain an ounce." And so, but they have now. I always say that if there were a famine, they would die. because they're not protected genetically the way other people are to retain weight in case of a famine.
Let me just cut you off here for a second to give you a case in point on that, right? I don't know how people don't eat for a day. I don't eat for 6 hours. I'm done. My brain shuts off.
Yeah.
I just tap out. So if you guys talk about a famine, I will be the first one to go.
Yeah, I'm the same way. I'm exactly the same way. So genetics definitely play a role, and studies have shown there are a number of twin studies, and they show that twins who when they lock twins up in a room, obviously they did it voluntarily, and they followed pairs of twins and they overfeed them, they find that pairs of twins tend to react the same way as opposed to other pairs of twins. So the pairs will react the same way as each other as opposed to the group as a whole. And so what that shows is that there's a genetic component in our tendency to gain weight. There's similarly a genetic component in how easily we can lose weight. So, and we can't help that. I mean, that's something that's there. The scientists aren't sure. They haven't pinpointed which genes are responsible. They're working on that. But right now, there's no definitive evidence that we can act on, unfortunately, to make a difference. But that said, it also means that if you know that you have a tendency that way that makes it harder for you to lose weight or easier for you to gain weight, then it just means it's all the more important for you to, adopt some of these strategies that I like to talk about, which is eating a healthy diet and focusing on energy density in your food, meaning foods that are going to fill you up for fewer calories and so forth. So that's important. But the short answer to your first question is, I still think everybody, regardless of your genetic tendency, will benefit from eating a healthy diet. So I think that just because you have a genetic tendency not to put on weight or and so forth, I think it still doesn't excuse. It's not a license to eat whatever you want, and that you can eat whatever you want and you're going to be healthy. I think I think it's not worth taking that chance because we can't be sure of that.
Yeah, absolutely agree. I mean, I just feel better when I eat healthier. I have less brain fog. I have more energy. It's just adapt easier. And I know people who've been skinny most of their lives and then develop type 2 diabetes at the age of 56. Yeah. They're still thin. That just shows how bad your diet was.
Right.
You're thin. Thin doesn't mean healthy. And I think that's a common misnomer with people. Just because you're thin as a rail doesn't mean you're the epitome of health. There's a lot of
plenty of people who are skinny fat, right? So
yeah, definitely. So what's the answer? I mean, to me, and I want you to really talk this one up, because this is how I feel, where I think our biggest problem in the US, because this is where we live, but is our amount of movement. Where if you go back 20 years ago, we are moving half the amount we did 20 years ago. Now make it 40 years ago. We're not moving, not even close. People on our, like we said on our Take a Seat episode, are sitting 13 hours a day. And when you want to go back to pre-cars, you were walking, oh my God, at least 20, 30, 40,000 steps a day just to get places. And this isn't even caveman times when we walked all day. They would walk from sun up to sundown, not stopping.
Right.
So what's your theory on this? And talk us through this a little bit more.
Well, first of all, I come at this from somebody who's an exercise advocate, and I'm an avid exerciser myself. So what the research shows is that you're right. They'll preface it by saying exercise is not a great way to lose weight. So if you're trying to lose weight, exercise is not particularly helpful, just because we don't typically burn enough calories the way that most of us exercise by walking or doing a yoga class or whatever. It's not typically going to lead to weight loss. That said, and this is a very important however, exercise is extremely important for preventing weight gain and for keeping weight off that you've lost. And so this plays into your point about why it is and how our sedentary lifestyles are contributing to the growing obesity that we see, the people gaining more and more weight. Because studies do show consistently that exercise, doing physical activity, is associated with less weight gain over time. And so the fact, as you say, that our society is set up for us to be as sedentary as possible, to move as little as possible, in my view, has certainly contributed to the situation we find ourselves in with obesity, because movement does, in fact, help prevent weight gain and prevent obesity. And so I think if people understand that what it can do, I think it's important for people to understand what exercise can and cannot do when it comes to their weight. So when they find that it's not helping with weight loss, they should understand that's one thing, but it's a whole nother matter that they should focus on exercising so they can actually keep from gaining weight, which is obviously crucially important.
Crucially important. And the benefits of exercise over the last 5 years alone, I feel like, this might be exaggerating a little bit, but I feel like every 3 months, a new study comes out about, hey, this disease, exercise helps prevent your chances of getting it. Hey, this thing, exercise helps prevent your chance of doing that. And now everything's being referred out to just move more, move more, move more. And when you look at things like osteoarthritis or osteoporosis, anything with the bones is shown to help. Type 2 diabetes is shown to help a little bit. There's just a plethora of things out there that help. Exercise just helps your immune system.
I like to say that if there were a pill that could do everything exercise can do, everything from reducing your risk of heart attacks, strokes, cancer, dementia, to improving your sex life, to improving your mood, we'd all be clamoring for that pill. And science will never, ever come close to developing a pill that can do so much for so many people. And yet the crazy thing is that so few people exercise.
It's the most underutilized medication with no side effects.
Exactly.
Boom. Mind just blown, hopefully, of everyone right here. So, two kind of last questions, but I'm just really curious now. You hear all the time people say you can't outwork a bad diet. They talk about the importance, it's a 70-30 split. Diet 70, exercise is 30. Where do you lie in that?
Well, it depends what your goal is. I think for weight loss, if you're talking about losing weight and that's your focus, I think diet is clearly most important thing when it comes to what you eat is more important than exercise when it comes to losing weight. When it comes to keeping weight off, exercise is crucial. So I can't give you a percentage, but it's going to be higher than 20%. It's going to be 30, 40% in terms of the importance of keeping weight off. When it comes to your health, I would put it at the same level as diet, if not more important. I think, and it's just my view at least, and I can't cite any study for this because there's no way to quantify it, but I think in terms of overall good health, the exercise is the closest thing we have to a fountain of youth. And for all the reasons we just said, for all the things they can do. But I think that there's no question that if people want to be healthy, if they want to live a life that they're going to be functional as long as possible and maximize the enjoyment of their lives and reduce the risk of various conditions, a long list of conditions, there's nothing more important that they can do than get regular physical activity. Nothing more important than that.
I love that. Absolute great answer. So my last question, which you kind of segued right into was with weight loss. And we're talking about how you said diet is the most important. So just give us your recommendation. If you were to summarize everything in here right now, what's the recommendation of how the heck do I eat?
I think that the studies show that the best way to eat for long-term weight maintenance is the same thing for long-term health, which is to say you should eat a whole foods diet, plant-based diet that includes plenty of fruits, vegetables, whole grains, nuts, beans, fish, seeds, lean meats, and minimize highly refined foods, things like sweets, chips, soda, French fries. Now, that's not to say you never eat those. So unlike the diets that say these are off-limits foods that you can't ever touch because they're toxic or poison, the idea here is not never to eat them because, all of us, I enjoy ice cream, I enjoy things, but I try to enjoy them as treats, so they're not everyday staples, and enjoy them in limited quantity. So I think that's the goal, but to recognize that you can't get from eating a diet of donuts and French fries and hamburgers overnight to eating this kind of diet I'm describing. It takes time. It takes patience. It takes gradual changes, but that's the kind of diet that's going to, over the long term, that you're going to be able to sustain. It's going to help you feel full and that you can tailor in a way that you're going to enjoy. So you're not going to feel deprived, but it's also something that you have to be patient with and to spend time and know that you can't jump into that overnight if you're not eating that way currently. But that's the kind of diet that's going to be best, as I say, not only for your health, but also for being able to control your weight over time.
Love it. Great answer. So the last two questions I ask everybody is, one, I want you to summarize this episode in a couple sentences. What's your last bit of inspiration you want to leave to people?
I would say this episode's about be skeptical of a lot of the stuff you hear about weight loss and focus on the basics. And it's far less complicated than a lot of these weight loss gurus make you think. And in terms of inspiration, don't be discouraged and don't give up. Despite the fact I know how difficult it is for so many people, they struggle, they gain weight, they lose weight, they gain more weight, they weight cycle, and it causes all kinds of emotional harm. And I've seen this, the struggles that people have gone through. But don't give up, because there are ways, methods you can try, things you can do to be able to manage your weight over time and to feel healthier. And if you focus on your health and how you feel and things are going to make you feel better and to be healthier, then that's what's important. And so I would say that people should focus on that and not get discouraged and don't give up.
Love it. Don't be discouraged, guys. Don't give up. And my favorite question is, how can people find you, get a hold of you? Anything else you want to mention about your awesome book, Supersized Lies, coming out real soon? So walk us through it there.
They can find out more about me by going to my website, healthyskeptic.com, and there they'll find information about me, about the book, how to order it. And then also I've created a number of videos on a lot of the topics we've talked about today, short videos, busting myths and explaining what's true and what's not. So I invite them to check out healthyskeptic.com. They can learn more there.
I love it. And thank you for joining us on this week's episode of Health and Fitness Redefined. Don't forget, hit that subscribe button and join us next week as we dive deeper into this ever-changing field. And remember, fitness is a journey, not a destination. Thanks for coming on. It was great having you.
Thank you, Andy.